All right, I think we're good here. Hello, 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 anybody who is awake in the morning. So today's stream is a continuation of some of the Blender stuff that we've been doing. Maybe it would help if I bump the size up a little here. So let's see. Let's kill Blender first. And pull it back up. Starting from the command line so we can see the logs is really what's going on there. If we go to the scripting panel, the thing that I'm working on over here can just get dumped into a new text. Over here, we run it using Option P to do that. In the editor over here or whatever, fetch Bevy type registry fetches all the data from a running Bevy app. And then if we are clicked onto like a cube or something, we can go down to objects and we'll see this panel here, which is supposed to exist. But I guess I might have messed something up there. Hello, hello. How are you? bpipe struct 210. So one of the issues that I'm having with basically this project has been a lot of Python. And I'm not a Python dev by experience. I've written a little bit of Python, but it's not like my language. It's never really been a language that I've been trading on professionally. So I've got like PyTest and stuff set up over here. I'm doing my best to kind of like make sure that this is a maintainable segment of Python code. Where do we need to go here? We need to go to 210. That said, the Python stuff is taking way, way, way longer than the Rust stuff. The Rust stuff was like done day one inside of a couple hours. The Python stuff is like taking a really long time. And it's taking a really long time partially because the documentation, let's get rid of all of those. The documentation kind of looks like this, right? And this is like kind of best case scenario. So I found out about node tree like yesterday. And it's like, okay, here's node tree, here's a class. Python like doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't have a type system because that's silly. But it is like more of a dynamic language, and what we end up with is like bpy.types.thing and bpy.props.thing. One of which I guess is like the class, and one of which is like supposed to be the function or the factory that instantiates the class. So if we do like bpy props and we get in here, okay, all the property definitions. So like we need to build some UI, and there's like some examples in here. Almost all of them are hard coded to like a couple primitive values. Whereas we need to construct some of this like type information dynamically, which is fine. I figured out how to do that. So this is like an operator, right? And then like this is kind of it in terms of documentation. Like that's all of the examples. And then you get into stuff like this. So you get like bool vector property, right? Which is like a vec of bools or something, which I guess isn't really used that often. Let's go to bool property. So bool property, this is like going to show up as a checkbox. You got a name for the user interface, a description, some translation stuff, some options. You click on those and it goes like, okay, whether it's hidden or not. But it doesn't really tell you like what hidden means. So like it gives some context for like operators, but you know, does that affect anywhere else where it's showing up? I don't know. Whether it should skip save and then what happens to operators specifically, et cetera, et cetera. We get like this one update function, but it's only on like individual values, and then like some get and set stuff. All of these things like subclass bpy struct, I guess, and also subclass ID. I'm not really sure how to phrase that. Maybe I can look at bpy types. Maybe this is what? Go to like string property. So it's like bpy struct and property, and you look at property, and then it's like, here's a couple of fields, but none of the fields are really all that useful. Oh, sRNA. That might be useful. Hey, Voxel, how's it going? So like, what you end up with is a bunch of this kind of thing, right? So I'm like messing around with annotations types here, which are like, I guess, dynamic ways of adding fields to classes, more or less. And when you run these things inside of Blender, you end up with a bunch of like these property deferred types. So it's like property deferred, built-in function, string property, whatever, some options. And it's unclear about when those get instantiated and stuff. Yeah, let me make chat a little bit bigger so I can read it. Yeah, so basically, let's start from, I guess, the Rust side of things is probably more understandable for people. Basically, the idea here is examples, event ordering probably works the best. So the idea here is like, this is your application, right? This is like a regular Bevy application. You've registered some type here, character. You add this plugin that I've built here. And then there's some other stuff here that doesn't really matter. And the idea here is that this character implements component or derives component. And it's got like a name, string, whatever, right? All of this is serialized as reflection data inside of Bevy, right? So using BRP, or the Bevy Remote Protocol in 0.16, you can get all that type registry information as JSON. If we look at the glTF file that I'm using here, basically the idea is we want to take that reflection information, bring it into Blender, build a UI for the components so that we can set the values, and then export that via the glTF extras, get that back into Bevy and instantiate those components via that reflection information. So the Rust to JSON registry type stuff all works, right? We can fetch all that in Blender. And this is the extras that come out of glTF on the other side. You can see like this is basically directly what the reflection infrastructure inside of Bevy wants. And this component will get instantiated and added to the element in the scene for which it is an extra for. So in this case, it's just like an empty, so it doesn't have a mesh or anything, which makes it a little bit weird to look at in code, but is significantly easier to like, we don't have any binary data with vertice buffers or anything like that, vertex buffers, whatever. So we go to look at the Blender side, which I've messed up. Probably should have explained this before I started messing with stuff. And the idea here is like, Up here, I have a command called fetch Bevy type registry that fetches that type registry information from your like running Bevy app via BRP. Creates a bunch of like property groups or whatever, like basically like type definitions inside of Blender. And then the idea is to show them with editors like this. This happens to be just like somebody else's, or like the built-in Blender transform UI. But to get something like this would be the idea. So we have a panel here. For some reason, the key was not found, so I need to debug that quickly. But yeah, that's the idea. It's basically like a really cut down minimalistic version of Blenvy. It doesn't have some of the extra features, like Blenvy has blueprints and they do their own glTF loading and stuff like that. This is like extremely minimal in the sense that it is no different than your average Bevy workflow, right? Like it fits directly into however you want to use glTF. There is no special glTF loader. There's no concept of blueprints, etc. So like if you know how to work with glTF in Bevy, then you know how to work with this. And the entire implementation on the Rust side is pretty small, actually. Like it is 400 lines of code, and half this file at least is tests. So we get to like 177 lines of code. So this is it's basically just an observer, right? So it's like line 60 to line 180, we'll call it. So like 120 lines of code. And if you read this code, the vast majority of it is being very clear about error handling, not actually like functional complexity, right? So here we've got Saturday JSON from string extras. Instead of all of this code, I could have written a question mark, right? So the thing here is I'm trying to make it very minimal. I'm trying to make it extremely minimalist. I'm trying to make it so that the maintenance effort of this is low. Because going from, 15 to 16 or 16 to 17 or 17 to 18 in the future, all of these things are things that I want to be fairly trivial to do. And there's enough complexity here already. There's one thing you always wanted to do in Blenvy is to be able to reference other objects' entities. Yeah, so I've been thinking about that in terms of the new relationships stuff. It's tough to reference things before there is like entity data to reference. But we could definitely do a pass and have some specialized concept of I actually don't know offhand if there's any reflection information to tell us whether something is a relationship or not. Perhaps we should figure that out. So I have some file here. I'm just like taking a bunch of notes and whatever. Because if the relationships have registry metadata, then we can probably detect which ones are relationships and which are not. And then do something potentially sneaky and be like reference or like label this with a UUID or something. Do a pre-pass on the tree of the scene and then instantiate all of those relationships with those entities. Like that seems extremely possible. But from an editor perspective, they have to be... also, this is in 0.16, so I have access to relationships in this project. But yeah, the idea of like, how do you reference another object is a bit of an open question. I haven't experimented too much with like what can happen inside of Blender with links and stuff, but very open to adding things like that. Just want to make sure that the basics are there and maintainable first. So the current problem we have is, and that's why I'm doing all this like testing and stuff. Like I set up, where's the document? Here's the document for how to develop this plugin. And it's like a Rust crate and a Blender add-on, right? And the Rust crate is just like, if you have Rust up and you installed Rust, then it all works. And the Blender add-on, you can like take init.py currently and like paste it into Blender and like see if it works for you, which I think is a valuable property for people who want to like mess around and change stuff. But this is what it takes to like run a test. You need like pipex and pyenv and then ensure path and virtual env and a specific version of Python, and then like you need to get the shims path for that Python, create the virtual env using that shims path. You need to activate the virtual env, then you need to install the dependencies into that virtual env, and then you also need to install PyTest, and then you can run tests. And this is, yeah. So like this is reflective of the amount of effort the Python stuff is taking and the amount of effort the Rust stuff is taking for this project. All that said, we do need to figure out why this doesn't have that key. Oh, and if you make any mistakes in the Python, like things just like crash, right? So the question is then, this is probably not necessary at the moment. Got some Rust 2024 stuff happening. So 210 in draw. 210 in draw is this one. So we've got, one of the things I was thinking about doing to start with is actually just describe everything that's currently going on. But let's get this fixed first, and then we can do that. Here we have a panel. This is the definition for the panel that we see inside of Blender. The reason the panel is not showing up is that this piece of code, this key doesn't exist, so everything just crashes. This key is supposed to exist. So this is on the current object, which there should be like a types.object call in here somewhere. Yeah, so here. So this should be a collection property with component data. This component data, all of these classes need to be both registered and unregistered. So we're registering component data. Component data is defined at the top up here with a type path and a name. There's a lot of really finicky behavior in terms of like, if you use a class to define the data types, then you cannot add arbitrary data. So if we have a collection of component data that has names and type paths, right? We can't add this value here. Like Python won't let us for some reason. So we might have to go into the annotations and do that or something. Haven't figured that out quite yet. So the question is, why doesn't this exist? Because it is set up to exist. You've been wanting to build something like this for it to build a home except in 2D. You'd like to use an editor that can place stuff like tiled, but that can read and write my raw object files in Lua. Yeah, so the Rust side of this, for all the reflection stuff, is open source, and you can go look at it right now if you wanted to. If that helps you or not. I don't know if you have time to even look into that. I know it's always like, oh yeah, I would love to do this, except that I actually have to build the game. and do all the other stuff. But yeah, so if you go to Rust Adventure Skein is what I'm calling it currently. This lib file, the observer in this lib file has all of the reflection information, and there's a bunch of tests in this file and stuff. So if you want to see how the reflection works, it's here. I don't know where you would put this, I guess. Like, I don't know any 2D editors that are like scriptable or that you can build extra UI for. But yeah, all that stuff is there. There's also examples in the Bevy repo for reflection. So why is the key not found? This is on 210. 210 is just an object access. I have fetched the information. So here you can see some of the logs. I've got basically a recursive function that goes through this reflection data. It's hard to read on screen, especially since it's always like one line. But there's a properties key in here, and that key has like all the fields for this struct. This struct happens to have like name, power, and like a test value. And that's like a string, an F32, and an I32. So if we look at I have both files open, but if we look at the Python tests, this is the reason that I have like bpy installed and stuff, so that I can test it without opening Blender. So I'm opening some JSON file here. The JSON file has the registry information, basically. So this is the minimal set of registry information for the types that are required to instantiate the test components that I'm working with. And then we take that, we throw it through this make property, which creates a property group. Here we set that on the scene. So this is instantiating, or I guess not instantiating is the wrong word. This is setting a property group with a number of types on this test data field on every scene. We then assert that we did in fact like build this type correctly or build it at all. So if this key exists in this object, otherwise we get the scene, which is not the type, it's the value. This up here is the type, so to speak. This down here is the value. We're using annotations on Python objects to get the extra information, and we're just checking to make sure that those keys exist currently. I would like to do more comprehensive tests to make sure that these are the right values or the right types, but we'll see. Thanks, we'll check it out. You do need to focus on the game, but you're now writing your maps in ASCII and making changes to them is awful. So maybe the time invested in the effort is quickly recovered. Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. Basically, if you're going to do like a lot of levels, if you're ready to do a lot of levels, then it can be useful to invest that time. If you're going to do like 3 levels or 2, like something less than 10, you can get away with like just doing it manually and not. The reflection data though is very, very, very like, I don't want to say easy to work with, but it is fairly straightforward and the stuff is already pretty much done for you. You did manage to convert your Lua objects to something that Tiled could read and paste around, but you had to convert and add each object manually, which wasn't great. Yeah. Tiled also doesn't have good support for like repeated properties on different tiles. Like you have to kind of like just stringify everything and hope it's correct. I found myself making a lot of typo errors in Tiled. Especially when it came to that like extra data. So these tests are actually passing. I've intentionally failed this one. I've called it PSOWER instead of power so that it fails so that I can see the logs. But otherwise that test is actually passing. So I used to be inserting this stuff dynamically, but I think to do UI in Blender, you have to have these as properties. And if you start typing things, like giving them property IDs and stuff, then you have to work with them differently. So really what has been happening to me a lot with this Python stuff is like the documentation doesn't really list all the stuff you should be or can do with it. And there's a lot of like, there's like 10 years of people asking questions about this. So like when you search for something, you find something from like before Blender 2.8 and somebody was like, oh, just use this like random RNA field that doesn't exist anymore. Blender also doesn't seem to support doing UI for property groups. So we're in a init.py, right? Yeah, so we've got this like property group stuff here. And you can do .prop, right? So you can do like .prop on some object and some key in that object. And this will do like a checkbox for you if this is like a Boolean property on a property group. But you can't do .prop as far as I can tell on a property group itself. Which means that even if that stuff is set up, you can't actually use it to build UI. I want to leave that up. Let's see, operator layout, panel layout. So let me get UI layout, and UI layout has all of this like .prop, etc. stuff. You can create rows and columns, but basically by the time you're drawing this panel, there's a draw function here that I'm looking at right now. This draw function like can't set any data or anything like that. And it just draws constantly. So you can listen to the changes in some properties and do things as a result. And that's basically how you have to do all of your interaction. So there is a function here called update component form. And this, I have a list of the components that are added to a given object in Blender. And when you click in that list, this code runs. At which point you need to like re-grab everything from the appropriate location because you can't actually pass any data into these. You just have to grab it all from the global environment. Okay, so the question here is the local this one. So this bpy types object for some reason doesn't exist. Not really sure why. Hey Chris, what do you think about when we will get a usable Bevy editor? Obviously, I don't want to commit anybody to any timelines or anything. So I'm probably not going to give you any dates, but right now, the editor itself is in prototyping stage. There's a bunch of people building a bunch of things like draggable panels and like, you know, those axes gizmos and things like that. A lot of that kind of work is being done right now. It's a lot of experimentation. The thing that is really relevant for editor work is BSN or the Bevy scene notation. And the Bevy scene notation hasn't landed yet, but progress towards it has. So I think in 0.16, if we are really lucky, we might get a version of BSN. And that would be what the editor would be targeting in terms of a format. So something usable would have to come after that work, right? So you might see something start popping up in 0.16, but it won't be like, hey, go use this. It'll be, hey, we're experimenting. If you want to work with something that doesn't quite work for games yet, you might get something in 0.16. If you're looking for something that you can just like jump into and build a full game with, you'll have to wait a decent amount longer. But that is to say, progress, significant progress too, is happening. I think sometimes it's hard to like describe the amount of work that's going on. But if you look at the discussion from last year about Bevy's next generation scene and UI system, this has a lot of the, I don't want to call it a roadmap, but a lot of the ideas that are being implemented currently. And things are landing like this, which is improved spawn APIs and bundle effects. So from a code perspective, this is how you used to spawn nested hierarchies of stuff, right? Command spawn with children or with child, or, you know, however you wanted to do it. And the 0.16 version of doing that is going to look like this. So there will be ways to spawn nested hierarchies of entities in 0.16, as well as arbitrary relations, as well as a like basic widget abstraction where you can just kind of impl bundle and return nested hierarchies of entities. So like this stuff is huge. And this is like the basis on which BSN is being built on. So after this, I think constructs need to land, the BSN syntax, and there's some other things in BSN like patches that really aren't all that worth talking about at the moment because it's kind of ephemeral. But yeah, there's progress, but you don't have anything to install and probably won't for another few months at least. In the meantime, I'm writing Python. So I'm not sure why this is not registered. And draw key error. Key not found. Why is key not found? Key not found is really weird because this object thing should be making this property exist on every object. So it is weird. I guess I was running this at some point. That was a while ago. If registry. The other thing is like, how do you get the default information from Bevy? I've been thinking about that a little bit. And I can't decide if the user experience is better if you can just like click a thing and be like, this has default values, use them. Or if it's better to like instantiate the default values in Blender for you. I think both have pluses and minuses. So this is checking if there's a registry. If we can load the JSON registry and there are keys in it, then this is adding objects to that like skein list, but this is the insert operator. So this is when you select a component and insert it. So that shouldn't need to run before the panel can draw. So I'm gonna, like, printing is very, very much a thing. So this is like dumping all of the functions on an object currently, which is tough. My understanding is that this should be getting like instantiated, but it's not clear to me what causes it to be instantiated. There's also yeah, so like if you do dot function name or dot prop name, it is a different kind of access than the square brackets. And that is really confusing to me. I really don't understand why object square brackets key and object dot key are different kinds of access. Oh, I can't initialize like so if you try to initialize it with a default value, you end up getting like an overwrite. Like you overwrite that field, more or less. Index error is good because I think that's an empty list at this point. So while that is, you know, like not good, it is good in terms of like the kind of error that we're getting. This. So I guess if object scheme, because empty lists are falsy. Which is wild, honestly. So this is looking for the data for the currently selected stuff. The active component index can't be used to get this information. Type path, active component. Yeah, so this can't get done if there are no components. So I think this whole thing has to be in. Oh, right. It's not curly braces. You know, I do mess up my Python syntax quite often. So there's that. We get the type registry, and then this is our panel. Our panel then, you can type in here and select a component and then insert that. And when you insert that, I have made another error. That's the other thing about working on add-ons. Like I build up code and I test it repeatedly inside of Blender, but it doesn't clean everything up. So sometimes there are objects hanging around. And like code I think works relies on some global state. Property not found, component data.test. Key and component fields test. That's because test is being hard coded. Let's find where test is. I think that's on insert. Right, so we insert a Bevy component, and right now, oh, you know what, actually? So I inserted component test player. Component test player, not all of the components are supposed to work at the moment. We're still in the stage where like I'm kind of hard coding some things. So which one was I working? I don't think I was working on player. So name, power, and test should exist. I think it picked test to be first. These component fields come from the property group. And then the prop needs to be connected there. So for the moment, actually, we do see some of the UI. Player is here. So if player is here and power is not here, name is here, power and other thing are not, that is because this is component data, right? So we've basically got a vec of component data. That component data that we're using here is defined up here. So we have some overlap here, unfortunately, in naming convention, because like things don't show up in that list unless they have a name. This component data is being extended effectively. And this is when we run into like this, how do I say this? This is when we run into the type issue. So because we've defined this field scheme to be a collection property of component data, and component data doesn't have anything but type, path, and name, we don't get the opportunity to set anything on that. So when we make property, which gives us a property group of the appropriate kind. So we are creating one for player here. We register the class. This is a dynamically constructed class, and it has all the fields we need, which is true because we're trying to iterate through them and getting them. I haven't worked with the tree data yet, so we get to that at some point in the future. This gets registered. And when we update the component form, I think this is where I was trying to set that. No. So really, there's a question here around where do we put this data? Because it doesn't seem like we can put it directly on the object, which is kind of what I wanted to do. So if we can't put it on the object, right, then we can potentially put it on the window temporarily, right? So if we update component form and we do not object active editor, but context dot scene, no, not scene, window manager. I don't know whether to make this square brackets or not. And then we set this equal to that typing. Then we try to use this field to build that UI. Where was that? I thought it was at 218. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was down lower. Maybe it was 280. 280. So then this, but use this. And then the active editor just gets replaced whenever you change that index. Now the problem is I don't know if that happens on the first insert. So like there's a lot of that kind of thing that pops up where it's like, this should work. But like, will it actually work? Well, yeah, window manager has no attribute active editor. So if that's the case, then do we have to do key access for these? And this is the entire thing that is kind of like taking me a bunch of time. It is, okay, I can put this on that, but when it gets down to actually using it, does it actually work? Yeah, so it can't find that key. Maybe bpy.types dot, or maybe I'm not setting it. Maybe I should try that first. Maybe I should click this. Also insert marker. Right, no property group. This has a property group, but the key doesn't get found. You can check the type of the variable by print type var name. I guess which, how do I frame this? What are you expecting to check the type of? Square brackets are mostly for dictionaries. Yeah, but like, I'm just inserting keys all over the place on these things. Right. So like I am setting this value, right? And I've set this value in both ways so far, but it cannot find it in either way. Right? Window manager object has no attribute active editor. Cool. That's the thing that I was going to do up here next. So instead of using context, we can do like bpy.types dot window manager dot active editor. And just like hope they don't collide, I guess. So that works. And now we have name. So like, I don't know. Right, Hollow Knight, and then like power is an F32 of some kind, and test is some value. And these are all set there now. But if we do it this way, we have to set an update function for this such that we can actually update the real value on the object because it's not currently getting stored. Are there supposed to be global variables? So that's the other thing about Blender stuff. You have no global place to put stuff, right? The only global place to put stuff is the window manager. And even the window manager is not global because if you have multiple windows, then you're SOL. That's it. Like you can have multiple windows. So if you put things at the absolutely top level that you can, which seems to be the window manager, then you cannot access it if you're in the wrong window. So there's windows, there's scenes, which have the same problem, right? Because like I'm in one scene right now, but I could be in a different scene, so I can't put things on the scene. You can put things on object, which is what I'm doing for the data at the end of the day. But the thing that happens if you put too many things on object, or if you put things on object in general, they end up in custom properties, and they also get exported with that. I don't know that I have an example of that at the moment. Maybe this test one does. Yeah, so see, like, this active component index is the active component index that you've selected in that UI list. And it automatically gets exported in extras. So at this point, we're now just like throwing junk data that you can't use into your glTF export, which, like, on one level, fine, it's not going to really be that much data. But like on the other, we really shouldn't be throwing junk into the glTF extras. So like, it's kind of a constant battle of, I do need to put things on the object, but the only things I can put on the object are things that I want actually exported. And when I put them onto the object, they have to be in the format that I want to export them. The other option, there is another option actually. The other option is that I haven't really looked into all that much. This is the Kronos glTF, like, Blender repo. And you can add exporter extensions. So theoretically, I think this would let us actually define how things got exported. Right, they've got a property group here with a Boolean property and a float property. They register some classes, including arbitrary extension example properties, which is a pointer property. Register the hook, I guess. To register the UI for this hook. I don't know where the UI shows up for that hook, but I guess that's draw export here. Layout draw. So layout panel, glTF, export plugin, property split, extension properties. The class must have this exact name, so glTF2 export user extension. Gather node, I think this gathers properties from nodes. So this is another option in general that I'm relatively unfamiliar with. Wow, it's already Saturday. Why am I working? We're doing a Wednesday stream because I won't be live Saturday. Well, not because I won't be live Saturday, but I will not be live Saturday. So glTF export extension might be one of the things we want to do. I haven't looked too deeply into that. But yeah, that might help fix some of like this kind of problem, and we might be able to put things in different places. So worth looking into at some point. But for now, I think the next thing, so we have this UI for component test player. We've got the name, the power of the test. We aren't setting any of the default data yet. So at some point we want to be able to like pull the data from the object and insert it into these places, which we're not doing. But the very first thing that I want to do here is actually, I switched the things, right? Cool. So we still have to test if this will get actually blown away. Or whatnot, but we'll see. Because like we can set this as a pointer property to some type, but Do we also then need to clear that data and set it to something else? We'll see. I guess I put a to do here. What happens when we get data from object and insert it? So in the meantime, I don't know if I can do an update function here. Doesn't look like it. Let's go look at the pointer property docs. My understanding is also that it has to be a pointer property to show the actual data. So I guess that's an assumption that I can test here too. So before we do this, I do think this has to be a pointer property, but this would be the alternative. Get that data in here. And then the question, of course, is, does that all work with a fresh Blender instance? Because things can change based on stale data. So insert, fetch, go to objects, get rid of these transforms, player, insert. We get an issue. Window manager has no attribute active editor, right? So like these things stick around from previous incarnations. Yeah, okay, so now that doesn't work, right? The thing that we did before does not work. And data expected any type, not RNA meta prop group, whatever that is. So this doesn't work. It has to be a pointer property. And this is the whole thing that makes this like awkward to do, because it's like things just kind of stick around. So occasionally I have to keep quitting Blender and doing this. Makes me really appreciate how good like the documentation and testing infrastructure and cargo and all of that stuff is. So run this, we get our panel, fetch the registry information, insert player. We do get a trace back. Has no attribute, active editor is not good. I feel like that is really strange. We need to get rid of this dir log because this dir log is like way killing everything on us right now. So let's dump this again. Open Blender again. Execute script. Execute the fetch Bevy registry operator. We're selected on the cube, so we can go down to object, collapse transform, and we get, see, every time we scroll in here, it draws the scheme panel again. That's just kind of like a thing. So we insert, right? And then we end up with window manager has no attribute active editor. I think that's because the logic for the insertion has to happen in both. Right? Insert happens. 183. This doesn't exist, so we can't set it. This goes back to defining that data as component data. So our options are basically like serialize all of that data into a string and stick it into a field that is typed as a string and then deserialize it every time we need it. Or don't type any of the data because then we get to use a dict and then we can stick stuff wherever we want. Those are our two options. And then the export, if we like exported right now, it'll look weird. Let's do test. I don't know. 219. Oh, I did it as a GLB. Oh well. Import from GLB. Back into assets. So we look at the glTF here and we look for our thing. It doesn't exist because I forgot to set the custom properties. So when you do export these and you have custom properties, you have to select custom properties here. I'm going to export now as just a glTF so that we don't have the GLB anymore. So now it looks like this, right? Extras, scheme, name player, type path, component test player. Like I would like this to just directly be the registry information, like the reflection information. I would like to not have to modify this once it gets into Bevy. But it does seem somewhat hard to do that. I guess if we are just thinking about this, I think that the thing here is basically any data we put on the object, like a list of components that we're supposed to modify and stuff, all of that data gets verbatim translated. I would like to not have extra data here. Like name here is kind of irrelevant. Type path is very important. But ideally, this would look like this. I forget what the values are supposed to be here. But like, it's like power, name, and test, which is like an F. There is power the F32, and then this is like an int. So if it was like this specifically, if we could get that output, this can go directly instead of reflection, and it'll work. And we don't have to do any modification inside of Bevy or anything like that. This is ideal for us. Now, to build this structure in Blender, we have to have a collection property here that is a property group for the types of the objects inside of it. That property group has to have a key name of the type path and a value of the component data. And I think that that's going to be difficult. Because if we try to type this information, that means every object has to be a different type. If we don't type the information, we can do this. But then I think we lose the UI list, I think. We can do a custom UI list potentially. But I think if this isn't a property, then we lose the ability to pass it in and render it. So again, this is ideal. But Blender and Python don't make it easy to create this structure. We do have to store the data on the objects. So I think at that point we have two options. Well, I don't know that we have two options. So the two options I was going to say is we can either, in an update function, constantly serialize like the window active editor into a location in the array. Which I think is the approach that I want to take, more or less. That requires us to have a custom UI list implementation, I think. And potentially that will not be possible to do. So we might want to try to test that in a smaller case first. The other option is we store the data however Blender will most easily let us store it. And then we use an exporter extension to like rewrite that data. And that is also something that I am not sure will work. And then if we use the extensions, I am not sure how those extensions show up in Bevy. So I think our glTF stuff is all in 3D. And we've got load glTF and load glTF extras. We don't have like load extension. We don't have any kind of extension data in the glTF, it looks like. Let's check for... I think glTF extras won't have it. Oh, this is in the glTF. So glTF extras just comes in as like a string. And what we can do with this is Saturday JSON deserialize it. And then we get that array of values that we can just plug into the reflection infrastructure, and that all works. That code's already written. All of that works. So I think I have a to-do to look into the export extensions. Where's this? Look into export extensions. Grab this link. This is .md. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think the only other option for us is that update function. Which feels kind of awkward. Because like, again, this is ideal for us in terms of the kind of data that we want out of it. What we're getting currently is this. And we're using that type path information and we're using that name information. So I think I want to at least commit what I have at the moment so that I know that I'm in like a working state more or less. Where is this? Let's do component tests. I think properties test.py is where we have our tests for Python. The development is probably something I want to commit. The other thing is like, it seems really hard for people to get into working on like Blenvy. And I think that building up a bunch of test infrastructure around the code that's being written would help that kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to push that up. I think that's everything that needs to get pushed up. Yeah. So now we can fork off and do kind of new stuff. So let's start with a fresh run. Don't save. Blender. Scripting, new. Run this. Fetch the registry. All so far so good. Go to object, close the transform. So far so good. This is the arbitrary, like, I'm picking out component test player as a thing that is the only type that needs to get that make property. So it's the only one with a property group right now, intentionally, so that we don't get 350 types being registered at the moment. So that all works. We get to the panel. The panel works, right? I can go into player here and select it. Everything's fine. And then we insert, and I'm expecting an error. The error is, first of all, in Draw, Window Manager doesn't have the active editor. So when we insert, I don't think that the index gets updated, like the active index. So let's see. Let's look at insert. This is insert. Insert doesn't have really anything to do. It's just dumping in some data into that scheme array, that list of data. Which shows up in the UI list at the moment. So the issue is that this doesn't set the active index, I guess. Why doesn't that set the active index? I guess that value hasn't been created yet. Because when we click on this, everything's fine. Right, we've got a component, we've got the data for the component, we've got the props that are, you know, typed and ready to accept typed values. But we have to click on that for the editor to show up. That is a really bad experience. And I guess that means that the active index doesn't get set when you insert. So if I was going to insert like marker here, insert, like that is still 0. And realistically, I think that that insert really does want to change that index, right? Because when you are inserting a component, you probably want to modify that component. So we should update the index. So these two things are the relevant pieces there. And then if we go to insert, then we have a couple of them. I don't know offhand what the difference between active object and object is. That reminds me of like web dev target and active target, or like current target. So I guess the question here is, if global registry, then we are inserting a new object. If we have inserted a new object, for the newly inserted component. So that would mean that it would be object skein length, right? Because it always inserts onto the end. -1. And this would be object dot active component index, theoretically. So if I do component tests and I insert like a second player maybe, then we get that. If I insert another one, then we get it. If I'm on marker and I insert it, then we get it. So now we have the active index updating, and that lets us keep that logic for how to show that editor in the place at which the index is changing, which I like. So let's close this out and open it back up and make sure that we've got a fresh working thing here, right? Fetch, go to objects, close the transform, go for player, insert player, no errors in the console, insert, no errors, we see the queue, everything looks good. What music do you usually like to chill? Oh, I forgot to say hi when you came in earlier. Sorry. Hello, good morning. What music do I usually like to chill? It depends. What kind of chilling am I doing? Yeah, I think it depends. I was definitely like emo hardcore kid growing up, so a lot of that music is relaxing. I do a lot of like EDM or like chill EDM these days. I like something with an active beat when I'm working, but not something that takes front and center. So like house or something, or like melodic trance or something are good for working. I don't know, if I'm just chilling, depends what I'm doing. Depends on the activity, I think. Okay, so this is really cool. Let's try to get this update function to work. Because that will get the data out, and that will be a minimal full loop if that works. And then we can always improve the loop, but that will be a minimal full working loop. Update. Active component index when inserting a new component, so that the appropriate editor shows Blender doesn't update the index of the list if new items are inserted. So we have to handle that if we want to. Cool. So we need an update on the active editor. And I think what that means is we need an update on the types that we're pointing to. I think this is where we need the update function, actually. I don't know if we can do an update on a property group. That's another thing. Update callbacks. This shows things on float property. Let's take this, I guess, and throw it on the base class, maybe? Can we do that? We can define getters and setters for the properties. But again, they keep showing like individual properties and not a property group, which makes me nervous. So let's look for a property group. So property group does have update. Okay, cool. So let's do then on the property group. So maybe we should explain this a little bit. Where's make property? Make property is funky. What we're doing here is dynamically constructing a class with a capitalized path using the reflection type path from the Bevy data. So if this is component underscore tests : player, this will be capital C, capital T, capital P, like Pascal case component tests player. I think that's okay. I think that won't collide because those path names have to be unique anyway. But theoretically, if you were exporting something in a weird place, I guess it potentially could. But that's a future problem. Then we take the base class of component data, which is what we looked at earlier with the type path and the name, and we add some annotations into it. So these annotations are all of the dynamic fields that we're constructing in this recursive function. And then this becomes this, which is a property group with some extra fields. So I guess it's possible that we could do this. It looks like that doesn't like that. So I think I'm going to go back to component data. And I'm going to maybe try this. Right, update component data. And then we need that to exist. I think it has to exist before here. I think that's how Python works. So we'll do self context print updating component data. And my concern here is that it runs in that list, but we'll see. String property name unknown, default unknown. Line 20. Oh, comma is invalid syntax. Cool. Cool. Where do you get the Bevy hat? Thanks for the content. You can custom order it somewhere. That's where I got the Bevy hat. I made it myself. Well, I didn't make the hat. I'd put the logo on a hat that was a blank and got it printed somewhere. The problem with swag for me is that it never fits. I know that you all only see me in this like little, box on your computer, but I am very tall. This line that you see like right at the top of my camera is actually the line for the top of the ceiling. Okay, so all of that, did this thing get called ever? I don't think so. So nothing has been updated yet, quote unquote. So will that ever get called? Doesn't look like it. Am I going to need to put this on every individual prop? That really doesn't sound fun. Right? Because like all of these would need it. Like this. That is not working. So I guess we can't. I don't know. That feels weird, right? Did I do something wrong? This is how these are getting defined, so it's definitely getting defined there. Strange that it doesn't actually get run when we change the data. Huh. I don't have an answer for why that's not working. Maybe the answer is we have old data sticking around. It's going to be my new default. Maybe it's because... Okay, name, component, etc. Fetch, cool. Go to this object. Maybe it's because on select, insert, update component form, active component index. Key in field. I feel like I shouldn't be logging draw stuff out at the moment. And this has the update function, right? Yeah, well, I don't know the answer to that. No idea. That's not great. We do need to figure out like when that data is updating. If we can't figure out when that data is updating, then we can't serialize it. Update. Function to be called when this value is modified. Must return none. There are no safety checks. That's expected. Oh, that's on pointer property. Did I look at the wrong one? Where's property group? Property group isn't even in here. Okay, well, that's unfortunate. Pointer property is, and pointer property is what we're using. So I think that's where this update has to go. Right, this active editor is a pointer property. So I think rather than putting it on any of those types, we have to put it here. But this is the vibe. It's basically like, okay, it says there's an update function that gets called, but no matter what I do, the value is supposed to be updating and the update function is not getting called and there's no error. So I have no idea why. Unless I've misspelled something or done something wrong. Here's self context. Maybe you can't print from here. Maybe I should do something like context.object scheme something, like something that doesn't exist, so that it forces the panic. Make sure that the thing is actually selected. And then I think we also have to do this from scratch again. So maybe we have to do a delete on that other field because it feels like that is very, how do I say it, sticky in that sense. So player, insert, test, does not do anything. Updating these values never calls that function. Well, in that sense, then I am out of ideas, and I think we have to go with the extension, the export extension. I think we have to go with the export extension because we don't seem to be able to react to this changing data. So the only way that we would be able to put this data into the property is to do it. Oh, man. This feels rough. Right? Because like from Blender's perspective, we want to keep this data on the object. If we keep this data on the object, then it also gets exported as custom properties. So any extra data that we store gets exported as custom properties. This is true for a whole bunch of stuff. I think if we look at the data in that test export from earlier, there's a QBaker in here, for example. And QBaker is obviously something that we haven't touched at all stream. So like other extensions store data in extras. And that data doesn't necessarily get deleted at any time. So maybe it's just normal to have junk in your glTF file. But I really don't like that idea. Right? Like just because I have the QBaker extension installed doesn't mean it should be shoving data that then sticks around when I'm trying to use this in Bevy, right? QBaker is not a outside of Blender tool. So I guess my other thought is we're doing collection properties right now for inserting into that list. I don't think we can do regular arrays. But maybe I should try. But realistically, I think the only other way that I see this happening is putting this data directly into that feels like I'm being closed into a design by Blender's inability to be flexible in this sense, which is really unfortunate. So I guess the next thing I want to test is, can we render property groups inside of a regular list without it having to be a collection? Now, if we do that, then I think those values don't get instantiated, which is really unfortunate. So really what we need is this component data to be capable of being extended with like a dict type here. We could do something really awful and basically define a type that is key value, where there's a key string value string or something like that. See, that's even awful too, because then we need different kinds of values. We need this data to be dynamic, and it doesn't feel like it can be at the moment. Because this component data, I don't think we can access a value property on this component data. So if we update component form, for example, there's active component here. Active component is the component data inside of that array. And if we do active component dot value equals like 3, which is completely arbitrary and intentionally so. And we put that in here, and we click this. That runs that code, and we get an error that is ID property group object has no attribute value. Have I looked into collection properties and UI list? This here on the right is a collection property with a UI list. So yeah. That's what this is on the right hand side. The issue, since you just tuned in, is that we basically have this collection property here, right? So on any object, we have this field called scheme that is a collection property of some component data, right? So far, so good. That component data has a name and a type path, but we need the value to be one of a number of different types. So we are doing a UI list to render these, wherever that is in this. ul underscore, yeah, UI ul list. So we're templating a list out. Right now we're just using the default one. I know you can implement a custom one. So that's something I was just thinking about. But this list, I think, to be able to render has to be a collection property, right? So if it has to be a property, then our options are potentially implement a subclass of property ourselves. And let that property potentially store a dict. Basically, the data that needs to be in this component data is arbitrary key value data, effectively. You think enum property is actually going to do it? I'll read the docs at least. Not that I haven't read all of the docs. Well, so I have all the property groups defined, is an important detail. I have property groups defined for every kind of data that I need already. I've figured that out entirely. So this component data class here is being used in what is effectively like a recursive function down here that ends with creating a type that subclasses that component data, or I don't know if that's the right term, and inserts the fields as annotations. So this dynamic property group construction actually works, right? Like that is, I introduced the error intentionally before, but we had a form here that's actually working. So that works. The kinds of issues I'm running into right now are basically like when I put an update function on the properties for the form, those updates never get called. So with the enum property, if I can take all of those property groups and put them into this enum and then pick one, I think that's fine. It's probably a little bit awkward because there's like 350 of them. But it might work. It's really hard to read these types for me. Like this is a sequence of tuple of 3 strings, a tuple of 3 strings and an int, a tuple of 3 strings and 2 ints or none, or a callable class that implements bpystruct. Or no, this is a function, or a function that we can give it to it. Or a sequence of another like set of specific types. I assume these are like tuple definitions of some kind. So it's like identifier, name, description, icon, number. But that doesn't give us like the data, right? So in that sense, they are, they're like C enums, right? Like it's basically, here's your int and that's what you get. Or here's your identifier or whatever. So I don't think that enum properties fix that for us. And I think if I just start sticking stuff in dicts, and lists and stuff, then we don't get the UI. So I'm kind of stuck in this world where like I can render the form if I put the form on the window, but I can't react to changes in that form using an update function for some reason. Maybe I mistyped something or whatnot, but it wasn't firing in any of the places that I tried to put it. The data that we want to get out of this is data that I want to stuff into glTF extras. It seems like using an extension might give us more control over how that data gets exported. If we stick a bunch of stuff on objects, then we get a bunch of junk in glTF extras when we export, and I don't like that. So yeah, I think that there's just a way in which it feels like Blender is working against the intention of what I want to do here. And I might be able to subclass some stuff and implement the right functions, but the documentation isn't really clear on what I would need to subclass or how I would do that. Right? So like, there's this UI list example. But it's like very much not clear to me whether I can just give it a list or not. Right? Like here's the panel they use. This is a template list. This is using some data inside of Blender. So like, I don't know what types these things are. I don't know what a material slot is, you know? I mean, like I know what a material slot is from like it's a material in that UI list that you can then insert more materials into. Like I know what a material slot is, but I don't know what the type of a material slot is. So that's template list, right? So if we go look at template list, it's some Python function. It takes a name and ID, a data pointer, a prop name, an active data pointer, which makes me feel like anytime I see this any type, it doesn't feel like I can use regular data. It feels like I have to use properties, which I think is true. Like I have to use something that subclasses bpy struct, which is like not regular data. It's only property stuff. So I'm like stuck in the world of properties don't support hash maps. Python supports hash maps and dicts, right? But if I try to use that, then I can't do any of the UI stuff, which is like the whole point of doing this, to get that UI. And if I do the UI stuff, then I can't get the update function to fire. So I can't serialize that data back into the glTF extras that I want, or the custom properties, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm like bouncing back and forth between like speed bumps, basically, it feels like. Value. So I was saying how this like dot value on the component data doesn't work. Right, like it also seems that dot access and square bracket access do different things, which is super confusing. Again, I will take full responsibility for not being a Python expert. Did that actually work? But you can see how we get the form here and like yada yada. So if I make this a value and I make that 3, right? And then I go down to draw for our panel, and we have an active component somewhere. Active editor, active component data. That's active component data here. So I think I want to do if value in active component data, like it would be nice to be able to do this kind of a thing. But I think this will error because it's not a property. Yeah. So RNA UI item R, property not found, component data dot value. And this error doesn't really give me information about how to fix that. Like, obviously I get that I didn't define value in the component data. Like, I don't even know, like, is it a class? Is it a type? I think it's a class. So I think all of this data is dynamic. So if I wanted to put value in it, I would have to shove value into the annotations. But then if I shove it into the annotations, does that affect all of the objects? Dot get value none. Dot get value none on box. Like, the issue is I can't build UI off that property. No, active component data. Like this. And then what? There's no key, or like empty string or something in the if. Oh, I mean, like, that's not the issue though, right? 304. Yeah, 304 is this, right? Like, this is key in value or whatever. So like I could change this to get, but this isn't my problem, right? Like this specifically, I don't think changes anything. That if is already passing. The issue here is the actual like attempt to draw the UI for that value. It is not the fact that the key does not or does exist. Right, so both of those things do the same thing. So apparently we can't draw UI for Python values. We can only draw UI for properties or like pointer properties to property groups, like that kind of thing. So that value has to be a property value, right? So then we work through it like this, right? So like bpy dot type or dot props dot I don't know, float property, string property. Let's do string property. String property. Cool, right? So this is some value. Let's like default it to like hello or something. And this then, since it can theoretically access that, should be able to show UI. But then we can't access value because it doesn't exist on component data, even though we've set that as a field. So like, it doesn't matter that we've set this as a string property because like dot value can't happen. Right? Like value exists, but we can't use it, is what's happening here. Property not found, component data dot value. This can only get to that line if value exists in that data. right? So I'm basically, I have an if expression that says, or an if statement or whatever they call it in Python. If this key exists, run this code that requires that key. And then that code says, oh, there's no key for us to use. So like, it's clearly relying on the data in component data, which means that that component data actually can't be component data. It has to be something else. And it has to be basically a list of heterogeneous types. What happens if I set the default of the property to some value like 0? I think it's set to hello, right? Right now. So you mean like this and then change it to an int property or something? I guess the other thing is like, make sure there's no stray state hanging around. Run, fetch the registry, objects, insert player, inserts. There's the active editor issue from earlier. Invalid ID property type, property deferred, not supported. Is that because I put this in here? Yes. So this can't get set here actually because it's a property deferred and not an actual value. And that throws the error. And this property deferred thing pops up a whole bunch. Like there's clearly something else that happens that is wrong. That causes this to be an issue, but that's line 40. So it is that line. So active component value. I guess when we first start, that doesn't have anything in it until we've actually set that, and we only set that. No, this has to run. Yeah, so we have to have this index for this to run. So active component has to have something in it. But yeah, I guess the other test for that is like, if I click on this, so yeah, then that active editor never gets set, which is because this is erroring out, etc. So yeah, I don't know. Don't know the answer. I'm going to refill my water, and I'll be right back, and then we'll get back into this. So yeah, I wish there was a little bit more prose in the like the Blender docs, because like, okay, things need to be any type, but what is an any type and how do I get one? And then I think if we just like stick everything in ID data, um, not only does it show up in the UI down here, which is fine, but we don't get the UI here. So I don't know. I feel very like I'm making progress, but I'm not making like, I feel like a little bit like I'm bouncing off the walls of that like Windows 98 maze over and over. Like that screensaver. Just, oh, is this the end? Nope. Oh, is this the end? Nope. Oh, is this the end? Nope. Right? Because we're so close. We're so close. We've got the registry data coming from Bevy. We can stick that into Blender. We can create like a list of components. Those components can be inserted. Those inserted components can be selected, and the form can be modified. But how do we save that data into the location that we need it in the format that we need it? Because everything else past that is done. Like once it's in glTF extras, everything works. It's just managing the data in Blender that is left. And it feels really strange and weird that they use this like set of custom classes. And like if you don't have one of the special custom classes, then you can't build any UI. And I don't know that that's specifically true, but I also haven't seen a lot of like custom UI either. All right, and like tips and tricks are like using the terminal. Like, okay, that's not really like using an external editor. I don't really need like those aren't exactly the tips and tricks that I need. I mean, I get that most of this is probably written for people that don't write code for a living, you know, like an artist that wants to automate something. And for that purpose, it seems decent. Because you can just like select into the material slots and then get some value from the material slots and show it somewhere. But yeah. You can't pass data to operators. So whenever you do anything, whenever you call any kind of operator or whatnot, you have to store that data somewhere and then re-access it through those global accesses. Right? So you can store that on an object and get context.object, or you can store it on the window and do like context.window manager. But it always needs to be like written out somewhere. And if you write it out to the object, then that data gets inserted into the glTF extras. I guess if we if we stop worrying about the garbage, is there a way we can set up all of that data manually? Kind of. We would have to dynamically create fields that have property values of each type that is on the component. I see a lot of people doing, like, taking an approach of, rather than nested tree data for larger, more complicated structures, doing a flat array of, like, object key paths, which is really annoying. That feels like I shouldn't have to do that. Blender defers evaluation until results are needed. You can force an update if you need to. Changing the UI context doesn't do anything until you interact with the pane. Can I redraw during script execution? The official answer to this is no, or we're going to tell you what is correct to do, which is fine, but modal operator is cool. Fine. Engons, constellation, exporting stuff. Names don't even get, like, you can set a name for something, but it will replace the name for you if there's something else that is already named that. So you'll get like name.001. Undo, redo, library lock. Abusing RNA property callbacks. Trying to perform operations from callbacks may work, but are not officially recommended or supported. Okay. So basically don't use callbacks, I guess. Check out advanced. Does that just say, hey, it's a Python module, good luck? Basically. So yeah, I don't know. It feels very tough to put all of the pieces together. Seems this API is for automating one-off tasks or something. Yeah, so operators can do that kind of thing, that like, that's what insert Bevy component here is. Insert Bevy component is an operator. That operator gets called when you click this. It grabs this value and inserts it into a place. with some default data. And then that data then shows up in this list. Selecting the component index is not an operator, but we listen to the property changing instead. From that, we set the active editor. The active editor currently is set on the window, which apparently for some reason does not get its update function called no matter where I put that update function. I think if that update function got called, we would pretty much be done because we could serialize that data into an arbitrary object. It's somewhat surprising to me that it feels so static. Like everything here is ostensibly dynamic, right? Like we can stick arbitrary fields on arbitrary objects, but not if you use any of the classes. If you use any of the classes, you immediately get locked out of being able to set fields. I like the thing that I would really like to do is set this value to be like any property, right? Or like impl property group, like that kind of thing. But that doesn't seem to be the way that things work. Kind of hacky, but can you do something like active component __ dict value? I don't know. I think that even if we can, setting the value isn't inherently the problem. All right, ID property group and object has no attribute. Dict, did you mean dir? So the answer at that moment is no. Oh, you would think it would have to be this too, right? Let's start with this then. So attribute error again for the dict. But again, the value isn't the issue. The dict access is the issue. And as far as I can tell, like I can't do this. Like struct is like a special non-constructible class kind of vibe. bpy, yeah, bpy.types.struct. Built-in base class. Note that bpy.types.bpystruct is not actually available from within Blender. It only exists for documentation. So like this isn't actually a thing that exists. You know? It's like they re-implemented Python dicts, but didn't actually implement all of the types. So, I mean, from that perspective, Like any way that I think about this, we need different kinds of like properties, right? Like we need, at the end of the day, even if we break things down and do like a collection of key value pairs, we need a collection property of like an enum that can be float in, etc. Right? Like we need heterogeneous arrays here. And the enums that they provide us with don't seem to be able to hold data. So we are stuck in a land of we need homogeneous, or we only have homogeneous lists. We need heterogeneous lists. But one way to do heterogeneous lists in a homogeneous list environment is to use enums, but the enums don't carry any data. So like we're stuck-ish. I can predefine all the classes we need through this, or not predefine, but I can define all of the property groups. I just can't find a way to use the property groups. Yeah, I mean, that said, like B props, int property, none of these can have, like this update doesn't work, right? What was the way we called this function? This was update component data, right? This should work. Because this is what I'm doing for active editor. Did I name this wrong? Did I rename this the same way twice? This is active editor. Right, we tried to put this on pointer property earlier. Tried to put it on every property. So like, theoretically, this is being set on the individual properties and it's being set on the pointer property. So if we set this up and we run this and we pull in the registry and we go to the object and I insert a player and we select this, we still have the dict stuff in here. We need to get rid of that. Let's just comment that out for now, I guess. So new file, paste in our script, execute script, run the operator that fetches the registry, take a look at the object, get a component, insert the component. We get this stuff. And we should see updating component data or a panic actually somewhere, and we don't. That code never runs. And it ran once. I don't know when that was. It was ages ago. Right, if I set any of these values, there we go. Update component data is running there. That's weird. I guess let's do context.window manager.active editor. How do we get the values? Because this is a pointer property. I guess we have to individually comb through everything for the object that's currently active. Sick. You'd think if they had property groups that they would have built in support for like property groups, right? Like give me all the values that are set for this property group. It doesn't seem to be the case. I'm still open to like my inexperience with this being the driver of me not finding that, but we have to do this logic in our draw function. So I'm just gonna go down here and snag this, I think. So this is here, right? And then this needs to be this. It's like all of these global settings that I keep needing to access over and over in all of these functions. The active component index, the box label is not a thing here, not a thing here. Type path, get annotations, and then we look for these from here. So this is our to-do effectively. Our to-do is get the actual values here. To do that, we need scheme property groups, registry, and active component index. So here's active component index. And property groups. I guess this is also valuable. "15 variable definitions" at the top of every function. Okay, so all of that happens, right? So we should see keys here for those component fields, right? So can we, for the active editor, which is not this, the active editor is context dot window manager dot active editor. Right. And then that means that this, theoretically, we should be able to get the values out of. Right? Like print active editor name. Run, grab registry, get our logs up over here, click this. Only runs when you hit enter, seems like. So there's like an implicit submission. Oof. Let's do active editor key instead. Implicit submission feels like really awkward. Okay, so right, if I say Chris Biscardi and then I move power not found, so like 10, test not found, 0. So like the values aren't actually initialized, they're just in the UI. Is that correct? But this gives us all of the data. And anytime you click out or hit enter, it fires, which is cool. So it's like on defocus effectively. What happens if I like drag this around? It constantly changes. Cool. So we have the data here that we need to set up. And then the ideal version of this, right, is to get that value key and set it, right? So obviously there's some more work that needs to happen here because this might not be a dict. This might be an array or something, but let's do new data is an object. New data key equals active editor key, print new data. And then we get rid of active editor. And we'll get rid of that log and this log and these things. Get rid of this stuff, I guess, and this thing. So theoretically, we should get that object printed out here. Now, we aren't dealing with the default values, right? We didn't do that. So this, I'm expecting to have issues. For, like the UI is set here, right? But if I change this and I click out, oh, I guess we did set everything because we still have state left around from earlier. So here's our object with all the data. Very clearly there is like either a float precision issue of some kind, or like, I guess clicking and dragging it doesn't set the value very well. So like the value you see in, yeah. So even if you set it to 0.36, there is a float precision error below that. Interesting. But we have all the data there, and this data is what needs to be set in that value. So actually, the thing that would need to happen here, using the whole type path thing feels like cursed Python to you. Kudos to making thing work. The type path is not terrible. The type path, you mean like this here? This type path? This is not the Python type path, if that's what you think. This is the Bevy type path. So really what that is the ID of the component by fully qualified module path. So not actually terribly complicated. Now, what is complicated, what I will accept that kudos specifically for is this, like dynamic property group construction. This was a pain in the ass. So yeah. Anyway, update component data, print the new data, and then this would be active component, right? Value equals new data. I think this is going to throw an error on that value set. And that's really the issue at this point. Property not found, component data dot value. So the way we can work around that for now, if we're going to do it like this, is we can do this. And this just means that we're going to have to do some extra kind of weird serialization stuff. So maybe I get this all to work and then I go back and I modify this. Because if it works like this and it's a little weird, does it really matter? You know? Because like, let's do this from scratch. So execute our script, fetch the registry, go to objects, find the player component, insert that player component. This is currently getting instantiated without, how do we say this? Without default values. So there's like no values on the component object right now, and there should be. That needs to happen in insert component. I think I have a note here. Yes, I have that default there. So when we do this for the first time and I say like Chris Biscardi for the name, this is going to error, as we just saw, because a couple of the keys don't exist. But this code should always assume that those keys exist because they should be set by the default value. So we do need to set this up to be like 10 and 20. And then component data here is like kind of unfortunately, why is test not getting set? Okay, interesting. I don't know if it wasn't getting set or it wasn't getting visualized. So yeah, we'll have to take this extra, I think, JSON out. But I guess theoretically, if you really wanted to, for some reason, you could go in here and be like 28. And that is now set to 28. So like this could be an advanced feature, maybe. Like maybe we put another little drop down here and be like, I want to do this myself. And then we're like, okay, good luck. And that's kind of like a nice little bailout. So the question here being, what kind of data are we getting out of this when we export? And the answer is glTF, include custom properties, and call this working, I guess. I don't know. Just going to export it. So if we go and look at working, we end up with a skein array, which has the type path and the value for all of that data. So we're now setting all of the data that we need inside of the value inside of the thing. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, Blender isn't letting us set it just like a struct here or a dict. That would be really nice. If we keep this like this, I am going to have to rewrite some of the serialization logic. So we need to turn this into something that has the key of this and the value of this. And the question is, are we happy with this right now? Because I can definitely do that. The question is this good enough for the moment to continue and to do the other like versions of the UI? And I think the answer is yes. And then the other thing that I do is probably look into the export extensions, but yeah, like active component index being here is weird, right? So I think we move that up to the window so it doesn't get exported, even though I think it should be on the object. The only other thing would be if we could find a way to hide this property from glTF extras, from like hide it from the custom properties getting exported. That would be nice too. Yeah, that one type I've only seen used for validating operator types. I don't think one needs to compare type object equals type object to in static type lang. Yeah. That's why match and stuff work in Rust. Because it's all of that's compile time checked. So it's working. I think we continue with this for the moment. That does mean that the glTF here, this is like a well formatted glTF. This is what we expect currently in the Rust code. But that's not what we have. What we have is this at the moment. So instead of an object, we'll have an array. And then the value also needs to be serialized or deserialized. Which we can definitely do. I'm not particularly happy about it, but we can do it. Hey, you just arrived. You can filter some custom properties during glTF export with a plugin for the glTF plugin. Yeah. The filtering that field out is not my biggest concern at the moment. Since you just arrived, let me show you what we got working. The export currently looks like this. So we end up with glTF extras. On the left is what I wanted to export. This is like ideal desired export. This would also be like an array, like we discussed, because I think that's a better user experience. But other than that, it would be like an array like this. It would be an array of things with key value or keys and values, where the key is the type path and the value is the reflection data. That's what Bevy wants to see. Currently, what we can export from Blender is this, which is the array of the type path and the data next to it. This active component index, I would like to filter out. It's not terribly important. That's not going to be like a significant barrier to this being used. It would just be a nice thing to do. We have basically everything here, right? So we've got components here that you can insert, that you can then modify. And the way that we're handling this is we have the dynamically constructed property group with a pointer property on the window that we then basically iterate through using the type information, and the value here is a string. So let's get back to the other thing for a second. No, the init.py. So the active editor is stored on the window so that we get a pointer property there to the right type. And then we're JSON dumping that into this value. So when I said that we can't use hash maps, it's this that we can't use hash maps in, as far as I can tell. Blender does allow custom properties to be structs, but as far as I can tell, you can't build UI off of base Python values. So let me commit this first, and then we can get into that, because you have really valuable experience, and I would like your opinion. Okay, so the way this is set up is we have an object property that is an array of component data, or a collection property of component data. This value here cannot seemingly be arbitrary data. It has to be a property. So actually, is that what you're saying? Are you saying that I can like do this? If I can do that, that's really interesting. I don't know if that's even valid though. Let's check it. So far, so good. Property not found, component data.value. This is the issue that I'm running into. Specifically. The reason I don't think we can put structs there is because of this specifically. It uses the component data type to determine what the type or whether value exists or not. And I don't know of a type that will let me put either like any data or some kind of struct or something. Right. Pointer property, collection property, great. But can I pointer property to a dict? I don't think so. And if I put pointer property here, right, this is on every object, right? If I do this, then the type needs to be something, right? So what do I type here? Right? The TLDR is basically, as far as I can tell, this always comes down to the fact that we can't do a bunch of different types. We can't do a generic type like a dict. We have to do pointer property, collection property, whatever. but none of those are a hash map. Now we do have property groups. We have property group definitions for all of the data, right? So we would need to dynamically per object set the component or set the right property group for the index of the array, because we do need these to be properties to show up in the UI list. So the question becomes like, that feeds all the way back up to this collection property, right? This collection property, not this collection property, sorry, this is the wrong one. There's an object collection property. This one. This is where we are storing the collection property data, right? That list of components. Currently, this is that component data from above, which has the name, the type path, and this weird value type that we need to define. So if this is not a collection property, right? If this is just like a list, I don't think that we can build this UI list from that, right? Because everything I've seen from how you render things in here, anything that is renderable needs to be some kind of property. And because it needs to be some kind of property, it needs to have some type here, because there is an any type, right? Right? There is an any type, which is just a struct. Struct is not something we can touch. It is something internal that is only here for documentation purposes. So we can't construct one. And any type is, I think, the corollary of a pointer property. But like I don't think we can do any type here, right? I don't think this works. Oh, of course. Where did I... let me put this back to a string for the moment. Just so that we can run this. So bpy struct object registration error. Collection property could not register because expected an RNA type derived from ID property group. So we can't use any type. Right? This any type doesn't work here. So the only thing that I can think of is subclassing property ourselves and implementing all the getters and setters appropriately to potentially create something that can act like a hash map. Which seems like a lot of work that isn't necessarily going to result in success either. And I don't even know if that's true. I don't even know if that's possible, right? So one avenue that we could explore, but I don't know if it's possible. So we end up with this type being component data. Because if it's not a collection property, then we can't render it. If this could be just a regular Python list, I think we would be fine. So maybe I should confirm that. Where's the UI list? Here's the UI list, right? Nope, this is bpy props. Maybe I need to confirm that. Where's the new button? New. This. Run this. Does that run everything? I don't want it to run everything. I think I just broke Blender. Oh, no, there we go. This is all going to get commented out for a moment. And this is going to get run. Oh, actually, that wasn't... Okay, never mind. Anyway. So this is our UI list example, right? This uses material slots to get its data. That means using template list, which if we look at the demo, template list takes one of these things that holds a property, right? Or that's no, that's the list name, sorry. This is like the object or whatever. And this is the key on that object that I think needs to be the property. So if we have a list and we do window or object.list, right? So object.scheme, and then this needs to set active material index based on that. Basically, this value needs to be something that isn't a property for this to be true. So we make this a little bit bigger and I commit maybe to writing a little bit of code in here. Right, and this uses like .prop and everything. And I'm pretty sure .prop only exists with or only works with properties. But let's see this for a second, I guess. So UI list panel example. This is on materials. Right. This is harder to make sure that it fits the criteria that I want than I thought. Right. This extends UI list effectively. Data is the RNA object containing the collection. So it has to be a collection property. Unless lowercase c collection is, you know, like implicitly being like a list is a collection. But I don't think that's true. It has to be an RNA object. So if we look for RNA object, it doesn't really tell us what that is. This is an old version of the docs, I think. Maybe? No, this looks current. Okay, so let's read a little bit about RNA. The implementation is the makes RNA module. This is C documentation, I think. So there's Boolean, int, float, string, collection, pointer, and enum. That makes sense. And then property is kind of like the property and struct. So struct is the thing that we really need that they don't expose. For you, building UI is more automatic. Also, a human readable name and description for tool tools are defined. So all of these things are defined in C. I guess that's why we don't get a struct. Can C not do that? RNA and DNA. Runtime access. Blend file and DNA structs goes into RNA information and accessors, which can be accessed from Python or the UI. So, I mean, we could theoretically maintain a side-by-side, like, synced list that is synced with that collection, and that collection could have the data for the UI and the, like, the synced list could have all of the structs, and then we could write an export extension that removes like the other data. It still feels weird that that data would get stored in the blend file because we really don't want it to be, right? Like we would want to reconstruct the types when you load the registry anyway. And we aren't storing the registry in the blend file because apparently there's no global way to do that. So RNA API, DNA struct members. I don't even know if you can do this. Built-in properties defined in C, available through RNA. Registered ID properties in Python code using bpyprops. These are the things that we're generally using. Custom ID properties are different, and they're usually created through the user interface, but Python can also be used for them. Internally, also ID properties, so they can be created on the same data blocks. They can only be accessed by subscript. I guess by subscript, they mean like a Python script. Okay, so we have these two things, which are interesting. BLRNA is something that I've seen. So, I mean, that seems like the best option if we want to customize the output. Right? Having that collection property be the list, like the source of truth for components that are currently added to the object, and then writing out the version of the data that we want, or like storing the data in another list as dicts. And then we use the active editor to set up all that data, which will be on the window. So basically we have two lists on the object. One of them is the collection property that can get listed in here, right? So we have this, collection property is getting read here, which just has like the name and the value, right? And then that is used to figure out what the active editor should be. But the actual data is stored in a runtime property inside of a different key that matches the same array. That would just mean that if we ever expose any controls that we need to sync them. But I do think that's the best way to construct the kind of data that we want. And we have to do that anyway to set the string data in the first place. So that does seem like the right move. I don't like the added complexity of needing to maintain two lists. I don't like the idea that they could get out of sync. I don't like the kind of error that could potentially arise from them getting out of sync, in the sense of like, if somebody is using this and they insert components and somehow they find a way to get them out of sync, or there is some like Bevy upgrade and they need to do some stuff. But I think that that's the best way to do this, unfortunately. So I'll probably name one of these internal and external, and then just dump the internals. Like when we do glTF export, just never export the internal and only export the external. So theoretically, that would allow us to store arbitrary like hash maps. Is there anything different in the file right now? I don't think so. Renaming is awkward. What's this? Do we have anything that I need to commit? I don't think so. We do have some change. We have that weird thing that I did. If we do that, then we don't get this like value here for the component data. I think the only way to associate these things together is to have that array. Unfortunately, I can't think of any way to let the user fix stuff if it goes wrong. So that's really unfortunate. Obviously, always intend to not do things that go wrong, but always nice when a user has control over something when it does go wrong. So the dumps here wouldn't need to be a dumps because we would just be able to get all of that data and insert it into the other object at the right index. And the active index is the only thing that keys us into which thing we need to be modifying. It's really unfortunate. Really unfortunate that we need to maintain a second list, but I think we do. That is, if we want the output that we want, right? Because otherwise this works. Right. This all works in the sense that, like, if I dump this in and run it, we get the information. Like, this value is all changing, that value is changing. We do get to do some stuff that's interesting, I think. Where's an int property? Int property is all the way down here. Let's make sure that these aren't the things that are actually running. Make sure that pointer property is actually running. I think I don't know which one it is, actually, if I had to guess. It is the individual properties that's running, as far as I can tell. Okay. So we have an update function on every individual property is required. This is required. The pointer property has one too, but it never runs. So 600 lines of Python later, we have a working export. And from here on out, it's just kind of like building out more and more of the types. But from this point on, I think it should just work. So next game stream, I'm hoping to use this to do development. And then I'm sure we'll run into stuff. But yeah, I think I am. You thought Python was supposed to be for quick, easy, terse prototyping? Honestly, not to get into like language versus or whatever. I do find Rust to be very good for prototyping. I feel like what you're pointing at is like the thought that being able to do things without restrictions leads to faster and better prototypes. And thus you could then like prototype a bunch of stuff and then like rewrite it later or whatever. In my experience, those prototypes always make it to production. And even in the case where I truly am prototyping, I find the refactoring capabilities of a strong type system to be a huge benefit. Right? I understand why people who are unfamiliar with Rust would find issues with the borrow checker or whatnot, right? Like I mean, you can see it from working with this stuff right now, right? Like the information that I'm getting back from when I run this Python stuff is not pointing me in a direction that helps me improve the program, which is really where I'm spending all of my time. Whereas the compiler for Rust is pointing me into a very specific, like, fix this and then the program will work, right? And I really like that, and I find that really useful for prototyping. I also find that really useful for like refactoring later after the prototype. being like, oh, here's where I took the shortcut. It's not like anywhere. It is in these specific places where I've chosen to explicitly do that. Yeah, anyway, that's a long way to say, like, I think that Rust is good for prototyping. And I think that the common thought of like languages that don't have restrictions are better for prototyping doesn't pan out, in my opinion. Okay, so we've got that one removal, cool. I've got some other things to do too, like the file path here is hard coded at the moment. So like if somebody else were to run this extension, obviously they don't have like a user's Chris, or most people don't. So like add-on preferences are going to be a thing that is relevant. But yeah, so overall we've got our initialization. We've got a panel to show the components and stuff that we've been seeing all stream. We've got an operator to insert a Bevy component. We've got an operator to fetch the Bevy type registry from a running game. And then it's basically all data storage and updating. The only other really interesting piece of the Python is this make property. This constructs a property group sort of dynamically using annotations. And that's what we use to actually construct the editor and do things like that. Because we need those properties to actually be able to build the UI in Blender. So we have to construct them. This is a recursive function that just goes through all the properties. Currently, you can see that like arrays, maps, sets, enums are all not coded. But if you have a struct, it goes into the properties. For each of those properties, it constructs whatever property needs to be there. For any values, in this case, uint, int, float, string, we'll return those values, and then that basically recursively constructs this type that is like a subclass of component data and can hold that data for us. And then I think the other thing that I wanted to check is, so like uint here, right? Unsigned integer. I think there's a way we can put a limit on the integer properties. And that's one of the things that I wanted to try. That's not how you spell property. So we can set like default and min and stuff like that, which we have more information in Rust than we do in the Bevy or in the Blender UI. So like if we do min equals 0, because this is an unsigned integer, right? Then we run this. Which one was the unsigned integer? I think it was the test, right? So now that's the other thing we need to do too. I'm not sure how much of the deletion of these objects that we're creating we need to do. There's quite a lot of like stale extra data, I guess is the way that I would frame it. If we do it from scratch, insert a player, insert, then this key name not found in update component data. Did I mess something up? Oh no, I didn't mess something up, but this int property. Am I logging that out? Actually, we inserted this at 32. Oh, you know what? It's not a U32, so it won't have them in. Let's do. Let's throw them in on the other int just for like kicks, just to see if it works. But yeah, we didn't do the default data either, so that's why the other one was erroring. So yeah, so now test can't go below 0 if you modify it. So we do have ways of enforcing values here. So if you have a U32 in Rust, we will be able to enforce the UI constriction on these values. But we'll see. I think that, I don't know how specific we'll be able to get. Like if it's a U8, we could do, you know, min 0, max 256. But I don't know actually how much of that kind of type information we have laying around. So we'll see. Because the data here is where? I have this data. Event ordering, component test.json, player. So this is the data we actually have, if anybody's interested in like the reflection data. So for component test player, additional properties seems to be false for everything. I need to look into what that actually is. We've got the crate name, the kind, the module path. The properties comes in as this hash map in this case because it's a struct. So we know it's a struct, so we know properties is going to be this object. It reflects component. This can also reflect like default, for example, which is interesting from the UI perspective. It can tell us which ones are required. I don't know if this is ever... I don't know exactly what information this is telling us. I have to look into that. But like type object, type path. So what we have here is like I32, F32. If we have a U8, then we can constrict this value more. That kind of thing. I don't think we have any control over floats. So if you use like an F32 or an F64, I don't think Blender will care. If you have an I32, maybe we set the min and max on that, etc. But yeah, some interesting stuff in here. In here, you can also see, here's an enum. Where's the Rust file? The Rust file is here. So what are we looking at? Some things is down here. Some things is an enum that is either one thing with a struct or low with a tuple. So we end up getting one of, and this starts to get interesting, I think, because I think this will be two different editors, right? Like we'll have to do one of and then do like a drop down to pick which one you're filling out. We'll see. Task priority is an enum. So it can be one of each of these strings. So we can maybe do some introspection. And if all of these are strings, then we have a regular enum and don't need to do that. And then it's just a drop down. No extra configuration. Similarly, team member has a struct, player and team, like we can see here, player and team. player being a component test player, so that type has to already exist in the registry. The other one being team, which is that enum. So in the UI, this would be like team, which is a dropdown, or like an enum dropdown. And player, I think is the player that we've been working with. So it would have the struct there. So yeah, there's some things that are like nested and a little bit more complicated to build UI for, but I think we can get around that with with a bit of elbow grease. Tuple struct comes in as an array. And then we look at prefix items instead of something else. So yeah, it's interesting to think about how this might evolve over different Bevy versions. I think that because Bevy doesn't give any kind of stability guarantees, I think that we're going to start off with just not worrying about like Bevy version to Bevy version. We don't have any way of automating changing stuff in Blender. So if we were going to rewrite anything in terms of data, we would have to do that in Blender as part of the add-on. Which we can do. So if we know what all of these, like if prefix items ever changes its name or something, that will be fine. And so on and so forth, but we'll see. The other thing is like, I would like the registry JSON to be the source of truth, but we'll see how much data we actually want to store. All that to say, we have everything. And we even have value restrictions and stuff. And this exports, and I know that the Rust side export works, so yeah. Hey, Starly. I think that's going to be it for today, actually. So sorry if you just got here. We basically built forms for inserting Bevy components inside of Blender. And these are the forms that modify them, and they come out in glTF, and they work inside of your Bevy application. And from here on out, it's just going to kind of be elbow grease to fill out all of the type information for all the forms. We'll try to use it. I don't have a stream on Saturday, but I might do another midweek stream next week. So I'll either see you all like early next week or on Saturday next week. I'm hoping by Saturday next week that this is usable in the game that we've been building, which is the entire point of building it. So yeah, thanks for hanging out, y'all, and I will see you in the next one.